You're listening to Audiology. Support our work on Patreon and be sure to submit your request for topics in the comments below. In the 19th century, America witnessed a movement known as Jacksonian Democracy, led by the country's 7th president, Andrew Jackson, and his followers. This movement, which really took off in the 1830s, sought to open up voting rights to most white men over 21 and reshaped many federal institutions, setting the stage for what would be the dominant political mindset for a whole generation. This period, often referred to as the Jacksonian era or the Second Party System, stretched from Andrew Jackson's presidential victory in 1828 all the way up until slavery took center stage in American politics with the 1854 Kansas-Nebraska Act, and the American Civil War later brought significant political transformations. The era began with a splintering of the Democratic-Republican Party around the 1824 presidential election. Supporters of Jackson began to form what we know today as the Democratic Party, while his political opponents, John Quincy Adams and Henry Clay, started the National Republican Party. This party would later merge with other groups opposing Jackson to become the Whig Party. The hallmark of this era was its democratic ethos, rooted in Jackson's vision of equal political opportunity, challenging what he saw as the monopoly of power by a select elite. Even before this era formally began, voting rights were being opened up to a broader swath of white male adults, a change the Jacksonians enthusiastically embraced. They championed a stronger role for the presidency and sought to involve the public more directly in government, insisting on electing judges and updating state constitutions to mirror these ideals. On a national scale, they were proponents of territorial expansion, framing it as a fulfillment of manifest destiny. Despite broader agreement between Jackson's Democrats and the opposing Whigs to sidestep slavery issues, it's important to note that Jacksonian democracy primarily benefited white Americans. During its time from 1829 to 1860, voting was largely restricted to white male adults, and there was scant, if any, enhancement and often a degradation of rights for non-white citizens in the United States. Robert V. Rimini, a historian, voiced in 1999 that the foundation of Jacksonian democracy rests on the principle that the people hold ultimate power, their desires are paramount, and that the majority has the final say. In 2015, William S. Belko dissected Jacksonian democracy into key principles: equal protection under the law, rejecting a wealthy elite, ensuring no exclusive privileges or monopolies, emphasizing the importance of the average person, the rule of the majority, and placing the community's welfare above that of the individual. Arthur M. Schlesinger, Jr., a notable historian and social critic, pointed out in 1945 several pillars of Jacksonian democracy, including expanded suffrage, which means that the Jacksonians wanted all white men to vote. By the late 1820s, many states had shifted towards allowing all white men to vote, and by 1856, most property ownership and tax-paying requirements were eliminated. Manifest destiny, or the belief in the destiny of Americans to settle the West and stretch from the Atlantic to the Pacific. This idea was about settling the West with independent farmers. Martin Van Buren and the Free Soil Jacksonians wanted to limit slavery in new territories to give white men more opportunities, but clashed with the main party in 1848. The Whigs, on the other hand, disagreed with expanding the nation, preferring city development. Patronage, also known as the spoils system, involved putting political supporters into appointed positions. The Jacksonians believed in regularly changing office holders to encourage public participation and keep government accountable. They thought staying too long in civil service could lead to corruption. This system, however, often resulted in unqualified or corrupt individuals being appointed due to their loyalty over qualifications. Strict constructionism, which is a belief in a federal government with limited powers. Jackson himself warned against overreaching state powers but fought for a balanced federal influence, especially noticeable during the nullification crisis. Initially, Jacksonians didn't want too much federal power, but gradually supported more federal and presidential power, opposing entities like the Second Bank of the United States. Laissez-faire economics, which means a let-things-be approach to the economy, was favored over the Whig support for modernization and economic growth. William Leggett stood as a leading voice for this view in New York City, opposition to banking, with Jacksonians particularly against monopolies given to banks, such as the Second Bank of the United States. Jackson famously clashed with the bank, claiming it was trying to kill him but vowed to destroy it first. Jacksonians generally opposed banks, believing only gold and silver should back currency, seeing banks as tools to cheat the common people, contrasting with the Whigs' support for banking. Between 1800 and 1830, a key change unfolded in the United States, the expansion of voting rights. Initially, only men who owned property could vote, but gradually this right was extended to include all white men over the age of 21. Many of the older states decided to remove their property restrictions, leaving only Rhode Island, Virginia, and North Carolina holding on to them by the mid-1820s. When it came to the newer states, none required property ownership to vote, although Ohio, Louisiana, and Mississippi introduced the need for voters to be taxpayers. Louisiana was unique in enforcing this requirement strongly and for an extended period. This shift towards broader voting rights was generally met with widespread approval and was carried out smoothly, except in Rhode Island. There, the Dorr Rebellion in the 1840s showed a strong, widespread demand for equal voting rights. Though even after reforms, there was still a property requirement for voting. If you were born outside the U.S. during this time, some states also took away voting rights from free black men. Just because a man could vote didn't mean he automatically went out to do it. Local political parties took on the critical task of encouraging men to vote, actively seeking out potential voters and making sure they got to the polls. Thanks to these efforts, voter turnout significantly increased, reaching about 80% of the adult white male population by the 1840 presidential election. By 1860, only 5 states still had a tax-paying requirement for voters: Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Pennsylvania, Delaware, and North Carolina. In a move that shook up how political parties chose their candidates for the presidency and vice presidency, the Anti-Masonic Party held the nation's first presidential nominating convention in 1831 in Baltimore, Maryland. Taking place over September 26 to 28, this convention marked a significant change in the political landscape, introducing a new way for parties to select their candidates, a method that broke away from the techniques used within the Jacksonian circle. Between 1824 and 1832, politics in the United States were pretty wild. The Federalist Party and the first-party system had collapsed, leaving no real opposition. This caused the old Democratic-Republican Party to fall apart as well. At this time, every state had its own political groups, but these groups didn't really work together across state lines. Political alliances were constantly changing, with politicians frequently switching sides. A lot of the people who used to support the Democratic Republicans ended up supporting Andrew Jackson. However, figures like Henry Clay weren't on board with Jackson. On the other hand, many former Federalists like Daniel Webster also opposed Jackson, though there were exceptions like James Buchanan who supported him. In 1828, John Quincy Adams tried to bring together various factions under the banner of the National Republicans, but he ended up losing to Jackson. By the late 1830s, the political scene had clearly divided into 2 main groups, the Jacksonian Democrats and the Whigs. The Whigs were essentially a mix of the National Republicans and other parties that didn't like Jackson. These 2 groups would go on to compete against each other both nationally and in every state. The Democratic Party, which took shape around Andrew Jackson from the early 1830s into the 1850s, was infused with the ethos of what we call Jacksonian democracy. This time period was defined by the rise of this party, with the Whig Party as its main competitor. The Democrats brought together a diverse group that included poor farmers, urban workers, and Irish Catholics. The formation of this new party was orchestrated by Martin Van Buren in 1828, rallying behind Jackson's campaign against what he saw as corruption under President John Quincy Adams. Although it wasn't called the Democratic Party until 1834, it won a sweeping victory. As historian Mary Beth Norton points out, the success of Jackson in the 1828 election was seen by his supporters as a triumph of the popular will. This victory was achieved through a well-financed network of state parties, political leaders, and newspapers, marking the Democrats as the first significant national party in the country. The Democrats' principles and actions were largely built on a widespread consensus that valued the Jeffersonian ideal of a society based on agriculture. They distrusted a strong central government, viewing it as a threat to personal freedom. They argued that government meddling in the economy only helped special interests and led to monopolies that benefited the wealthy. Their solution was to promote the independence of individuals, particularly artisans and farmers, by cutting off federal support for banks and corporations and limiting paper money. Jackson himself was known for vetoing more bills than all his predecessors combined, which paved the way for a presidency with more power. While progressive reformers of the time wanted an active government to implement changes like educational reforms, Jackson and his associates were not in favor. They saw public education, for example, as an infringement on individual liberty and a threat to freedom of religion. When it came to Native American issues, Jackson did not frame it as a racial problem, but approached it from military and legal perspectives. Notably, in 1813, he adopted a 3-year-old Native American orphan, whom he felt a special kinship with. However, when conflicts arose between state rights and tribal sovereignty, Jackson sided with the states, leading to the forced relocation of Native Americans in what is famously known as the Trail of Tears. One of Jackson's notable followers was Stephen A. Douglas, a senator from Illinois who played a significant role in passing the Compromise of 1850 and was a major candidate for the Democratic presidential nomination in 1852. According to his biographer, Robert W. Johanson, Douglas was firmly in the Jacksonian camp, believing in the power of popular sovereignty and the idea that the will of the majority was the true voice of the people. Andrew Jackson kept his promise to expand the role of ordinary citizens in the United States government. However, his methods sparked a storm of controversy. His approach to governance included shutting down the Bank of the United States, pushing for expansion towards the West, and forcibly relocating Native Americans from the Southeast. Critics from across the political spectrum, including notable figures like Henry Clay and John C. Calhoun, labeled Jackson a tyrant, a criticism that led to the formation of the Whig Party. Jackson introduced what is known as the spoils system, reshuffling government officials by replacing those from rival parties with his own supporters as a reward for their loyalty. Facing opposition in Congress, he frequently used his veto power to counteract legislation he disagreed with. A notable example of this was his veto of the Maysville Road Bill in 1830, a project that would have federally funded a road in Kentucky, the state Clay represented. Jackson argued against using federal money for state-specific projects, highlighting a fundamental dispute over the role of the federal government. According to Carl Lane, a significant achievement of Jackson's presidency was the elimination of the national debt, aligning with Jefferson's vision for an America free from the influence of wealthy bankers, engaging in global affairs from a position of self-sufficiency, upholding virtuous standards domestically, and governed with minimal corruption by a lean government. Sean Wilentz points out that Jacksonian democracy eventually evolved, with many former supporters shifting their focus from battling financial elites to opposing the expansion of slavery, contributing to the rise of the Republican Party. This shift is evident in the opposition to the Wilmot Proviso, the Free Soil Party's rebellion in 1848, and the defection from the Democrats in 1854, following the Kansas-Nebraska Act. While some Jacksonian leaders, like Chief Justice Roger B. Taney, supported slavery, evidenced by the Dred Scott decision in 1857, others, such as Andrew Johnson, opposed secession in 1861. Notably in the North, figures like Martin Van Buren, Stephen A. Douglas, and the War Democrats stood firmly against secession, contrasting with the stance of Franklin Pierce, James Buchanan, and the Copperheads. Martin Van Buren, who was once the vice president under Jackson and a significant figure in organizing the Jacksonian Democratic Party, also served as president. He played a crucial role in shaping how modern presidential campaigns are organized and conducted. However, Van Buren's presidency came to an end in 1840 when he was defeated by William Henry Harrison from the Whig Party. Unfortunately, Harrison passed away just 30 days after taking office, leading his vice president John Tyler to quickly find common ground with the Jacksonians. After Tyler, James K. Polk, a supporter of Jackson, secured the presidency in 1844 with Jackson's backing. Franklin Pierce was another president influenced by Jackson, showing his support for Jackson's ideas. James Buchanan, who worked under Jackson as the minister to Russia and served as Secretary of State for Polk, became president later, but did not follow Jacksonian policies. Lastly, Andrew Johnson, a fervent advocate for Jackson, became president after Abraham Lincoln's assassination in 1865. By that time, however, The influence of Jacksonian democracy had faded from the forefront of American politics. Thanks for watching. Share your thoughts in the comments and subscribe for more content.